Kerry von Erich should have been one of the biggest stars in wrestling history. He was an incredibly talented grappler that came from wrestling royalty. He held world titles and headlined the biggest shows in the business, but in the end, his whole world fell apart. Kerry's father, Fritz von Erich, ran the Dallas territory, which at the time was called Big Time Wrestling. It was an established promotion within the NWA, and Fritz had been in control for nearly a decade. Kerry was trained by his dad, and he made his debut in May 1978. But he wasn't walking into the business alone. His older brothers Kevin and David had already been wrestling in the promotion for 2 years. They were the top babyfaces in the company, and the fans absolutely loved them. Before Kerry even entered the ring, the Von Erich name was already the biggest draw in Texas. In July 1979, Kerry won his first championship, the NWA Texas Tag Team titles, alongside Bruiser Brody. They captured the belts in their very first match together. Kerry was being positioned as a future star, and by December 1980, he was ready. He defeated Gino Hernandez to win the NWA American Heavyweight Championship, his first major singles title. But the real breakthrough came in June 1982. At his father's retirement show, Kerry faced Harley Race, a 7-time former World Heavyweight Champion, and Kerry beat him. That victory elevated him to main event status, and it convinced the NWA that he was a legitimate contender for the world title. And so they sanctioned a series of matches between Kerry and the reigning champion, Ric Flair. The most important of those matches came on Christmas Day 1982. It was a steel cage match for the NWA World Heavyweight title at the Reunion Arena in Dallas. The fabulous Freebirds got involved and they turned on Kerry. Terry Gordy smashed the cage door into his head and the match was stopped. The Freebirds became the most hated heels in Texas overnight, and what followed was a brutal 5-year war between the Von Erichs and the Freebirds. It dominated the promotion and became one of the most legendary feuds in wrestling history. Kerry was now the golden boy of Texas wrestling, and everything was in place for him to become a main event level superstar. He was also at his happiest in his personal life as he married his wife Catherine, and they'd soon have 2 daughters together. But at the start of 1984, the family suffered a tragedy when David Von Erich passed away in Tokyo. He'd just arrived there to start a tour for All Japan Pro Wrestling, and his body was discovered in his hotel room. The official cause of death was acute enteritis or an intestinal rupture. David was considered the most talented of all the brothers, and he was the NWA's chosen successor to Ric Flair as World Heavyweight Champion. They'd already made the decision for David to win the title and hold it long term, but now he was gone, those plans died with him. The Von Erich family took it extremely hard, and suddenly all of the pressure fell onto Kerry as it was decided that he would win the NWA title in tribute. 3 months later, in May 1984, the promotion held a tribute show in David's honour. Over 45,000 fans packed the venue to witness Kerry beat Ric Flair for the NWA World Heavyweight title. It was the biggest crowd in Texas wrestling history and the peak of Kerry's career, but it wouldn't last. Just 18 days later, he lost the belt back to Flair in Japan. The NWA sold it as a controversial finish, but the real reason was far more troubling. Kerry had become unreliable. He was no-showing events thanks to a growing substance abuse problem. In an interview, Flair said, "Kerry was a great kid. He was just so lovable and so nice, but you could just feel there was something wrong. There were quite a few times I worked with Kerry where he was impaired. One time we were in Fort Worth and he came to the ring with his boots untied. He was 15 minutes late getting to the ring and his boots weren't laced up, and we were going an hour. The match was absolutely terrible, but because Fritz had that much influence, it came out in the paper that Kerry had a fever and didn't know where he was, and that he was brave enough to get in the ring despite being sick, but he should not have been in the ring that night. The NWA committee couldn't risk keeping the title on someone they didn't trust to even show up. David had been destined for a long reign as champion, but Kerry was only ever going to be a short-term, emotional choice. For the next 2 years, Kerry remained the biggest star in world class, holding multiple titles and main eventing the promotion's biggest shows. But behind the scenes, his addiction problems were getting worse. The pressure to carry the family legacy, combined with the shame of his drug use, created a vicious cycle that he couldn't escape. By 1986, it was becoming impossible to hide what was happening to him, and in June of that year, everything came crashing down. Kerry took his motorcycle out for a ride. He wasn't wearing a helmet or any protective gear, and he was trying to pass a truck on a 2-lane road when he crashed into the back of a police car. The impact nearly killed him. He suffered a dislocated hip and a crushed right foot, with doctors performing surgery to try and save it. But while he was recovering in hospital, Kerry decided that he wanted something to eat, so he got out of bed and walked on his injured foot, even though it hadn't healed. That decision caused further damage that the doctors couldn't repair, and they were forced to amputate it. Kerry now faced a choice: retire from wrestling or find a way to continue. He chose the latter and made the amputation a secret from everyone. He returned to the ring wearing a prosthetic limb that fit inside his wrestling boots, and he told people his ankle had been fused into a permanent position. To keep anyone from discovering the truth, he entered locker rooms with his boots already on, and after shows he showered without taking them off. For the rest of his career, Kerry wrestled on just one foot, and almost nobody ever found out. In April 1987, tragedy struck the family once again when Mike Von Erich committed suicide. He was just 23 years old. This was the second brother that Kerry had lost. Kerry was already battling painkiller addiction and living with the constant stress of hiding his disability, and now he was burying another brother. The survivor guilt was overwhelming, and it cemented a dark belief in his mind that he would be next. Kerry found the physical pain of wrestling on a prosthetic foot to be unbearable, which meant his painkiller addiction kept getting worse. But despite everything, he continued to win championships. He held the world-class heavyweight title multiple times and proved that he could still perform at a high level. But at the same time, the family business was falling apart. Attendance at the Sportatorium had dropped from over 4,000 fans to less than 1,000. World Class left the NWA in 1986, partly because the organisation refused to give Kerry another world title reign due to his unreliability. The remaining brothers were no-showing events in smaller towns, and fans were becoming disillusioned as the family's clean living image started to crumble. Kerry knew that he was contributing to the decline of his dad's territory, and that knowledge ate away at him. The shame and guilt of letting everyone down created a hopeless feeling that he couldn't escape, and in December 1988, that failure became impossible to ignore. Super Clash 3 was a desperate attempt by the AWA, CWA and World Class to compete with the WWF. All three promotions were dying, but this was supposed to be their rally cry, their version of WrestleMania. Kerry was scheduled to face Jerry Lawler in the main event. 4 years earlier, he'd won the NWA World Championship in front of 45,000 fans at the Texas Stadium, but now less than 2,000 people showed up. And according to Lawler, Kerry arrived backstage in no condition to perform. When his father needed him the most, Kerry couldn't even show up clean and sober. In 1990, World Class went out of business and Kerry signed a contract with the WWF. Vince McMahon was looking for a successor to Hulk Hogan, and Kerry fit the prototype perfectly. He had the look, the body, and the charisma. At SummerSlam 1990, Kerry was chosen as a last-minute replacement for the injured Brutus Beefcake. He faced Mr. Perfect for the Intercontinental title, and he won. 1 month into his WWF career, and Kerry Von Erich was a champion on the national stage. Just 2 months after winning the title, in October 1990, Kerry was travelling to Fort Wayne, Indiana, with Bret Hart. In his book, Bret wrote, "Kerry was a big, handsome, well-built kid with a kind streak a mile wide, who wouldn't think twice about giving you the shirt off his back. I loved how genuine and considerate he was, especially to the fans. Unfortunately, like his brothers, Kerry had a history of drug problems and was often mistaken for a dolt by wrestlers who didn't know him well. Kerry and I talked on and on about our brothers and good times that we'd both had as famous families in such a strange business. On the ride, Kerry confided that he'd made up his mind to join his brothers in heaven. He was only waiting for God to tell him when. I said, 'Kerry, your children will always need you, even more than your brothers do. You have to think of your children.' He allowed me to think that I'd made him change his mind, but I feared it was only lip service." In December 1990, Kerry lost the Intercontinental title back to Mr. Perfect before making his only WrestleMania appearance where he defeated Dino Bravo. Then in September 1991, his youngest brother Chris committed suicide. He was the third brother that Kerry had lost. As the year wore on, Kerry's push in the WWF started to fade. He lost matches to Ric Flair and was squashed by The Undertaker in under 4 minutes. At the same time, his personal life was collapsing. His marriage to his wife Catherine ended in divorce, and his painkiller addiction was now entering its peak phase. As his mental health continued to suffer, so did his reliability, and then he was released from the WWF. Kerry returned to Dallas and started working for the Global Wrestling Federation and other independent promotions. In early 1993, he was arrested on a drugs charge while already being on probation for another misdemeanor, and jail time was certain. Everything had finally got too much for Kerry. His addiction issues compounded the immense depression he felt for losing his wife, his brothers, and his job. And he certainly couldn't face the prospect of going to prison. The next day, he met his dad on his ranch, hugged him, told him he loved him, then walked into the woods and shot himself in the heart. His father was the one who found him, along with a note that said he was joining his brothers in heaven. What should have been a wrestling dynasty became a family destroyed by pressure, addiction, and impossible expectations. In many ways, Kerry had everything. He was a world-class athlete and an incredibly charismatic wrestler, but in the end, none of it could save him from himself.